Keanu Reeves sat quietly in his small living room, staring at the invitation in his hand. It was sleek, black, and gold, with bold letters that read, "Paris Fashion Week front row guest." He blinked a few times, unsure if it was a mistake. Him at Fashion Week? He was never one for flashy clothes or red carpets. He liked quiet coffee shops, worn-out boots, and riding his motorcycle with no one watching. But his agent had insisted. "It's good for the foundation," she said. "Good for your image. Just show your face, stay polite, smile a bit." Keanu wasn't sure what his image even meant anymore. He wasn't like other stars. Fame had never changed him. He sighed and put the invitation on the table. A week in Paris. Fancy people. Bright lights. Loud cameras. It wasn't his world. But if showing up could help raise awareness for cancer research, something close to his heart, maybe it was worth the discomfort. A few days later, Keanu packed his old duffel bag. No suits, no designers calling. Just his usual black jeans, some shirts, and the same scuffed-up boots he always wore. The flight to Paris was quiet. No assistants, no photographers waiting. That was how he liked it. The day of the event arrived quickly. The show was at a grand historic hall in the center of Paris. The red carpet stretched far, filled with people in glowing outfits, strange hats, and high heels taller than most cups of coffee. Keanu stood at the end of the line, adjusting his coat, feeling a little out of place. When he stepped onto the red carpet, some photographers noticed, but only a few lifted their cameras. Most looked past him, focusing instead on pop stars and models dressed like neon dreams. Whispers floated around him. "Is that Keanu? What is he wearing? He looks old." He heard them. His ears were sharp, even if he pretended not to care. Still, he walked forward, calm as ever. A reporter smiled at him, but her mic moved past him quickly to a young influencer with bright pink hair and gold wings on her back. Keanu nodded politely and kept walking. Inside, the crowd buzzed with excitement. People greeted each other with air kisses and fake laughs. Keanu stood alone near the edge of the room, sipping water. No one approached him. No one offered a handshake. Then someone brushed past him. A tall designer in a silver coat looked at him, laughed under his breath, and muttered, "Wrong show, cowboy." Keanu didn't flinch. He just looked away and kept sipping his water. As the fashion show started, Keanu was shown to his seat front row, just like the invite said. He sat between two models who didn't even look his way. He noticed one of them glance at his boots, then at her friend. They both smiled tightly and turned away. The lights dimmed, music blasted. Models walked out in outfits that looked more like space armor than clothes. Cameras flashed, cheers echoed, but Keanu stayed quiet. He didn't clap much. He didn't pretend to understand what he was seeing. He wasn't judging. He just didn't belong. During the break, an online influencer sitting nearby snapped a photo of him from the side, zooming in on his coat. She posted it with the caption, "When your uncle crashes Fashion Week by mistake." Within minutes, the image started spreading. Comments flooded in. "Who dressed him? Why is he here? He looks like a janitor." The mockery grew. People online, people in the room, even people who once loved his movies. Many now laughed at his simplicity. But Keanu didn't know about the post yet. He just sat there quietly, looking around. He watched people cheer and pose, scream, and laugh. He listened to their jokes, even the ones meant to hurt. He could feel the coldness, the judgment in their eyes. But instead of shrinking, he simply smiled to himself. This wasn't new to him. He had lived through worse. Much worse. They saw an old man in boots. But they didn't know what those boots had walked through. And as the music played again, and more models stepped onto the runway, Keanu Reeves leaned back in his seat, unnoticed and unbothered, not knowing the whole world would soon hear his story. And nothing would ever be the same after that. Keanu Reeves stayed seated in the front row as the show went on, the loud music shaking the air. Bright lights flashed over the stage while tall models walked past in shiny, expensive clothes. The crowd around him clapped and cheered for every design. But Keanu didn't clap much. He watched silently, his face calm, his thoughts far away. People near him glanced at him now and then. They didn't smile. They didn't greet him. Some looked confused. Others looked amused. One man in a green suit whispered loudly, "Isn't that the Matrix guy? What's he doing here looking like that?" Keanu heard it. He didn't react. He just kept watching the stage, letting the moment pass over him like wind. But inside, he felt like a guest at someone else's party, one where he didn't belong. Another model walked by, wearing a long silver dress covered in glowing crystals. The people around him gasped and took out their phones. Keanu nodded politely, but he didn't reach for his phone. The man next to him noticed and smirked. "You don't look like a fashion fan," he said, trying to sound friendly but failing. Keanu turned and gave a small smile. "I'm here for charity. Just trying to support a cause." "Oh, right," the man said, before turning away like the conversation didn't matter. Backstage, designers and stars were whispering about Keanu. Some laughed. A famous stylist told his assistant, "Who let that mountain man in? He's bringing the vibe down." On social media, things were getting worse. The picture of Keanu in his old black coat and dusty boots had gone viral. Some people defended him, calling him real and humble. But many others were cruel. "Homeless Keanu crashes fashion party," read one comment. "Looks like he just rolled out of a 90s movie," wrote another. Even celebrities began liking and sharing the jokes. Some influencers made short videos pretending to be Keanu showing up to Fashion Week in pajamas. The hashtags were spreading fast. Hashtag wrong show Keanu, hashtag Matrix needs his tie list, hashtag boots on the runway. Keanu still didn't know. He had no phone in his hand. He wasn't scrolling, wasn't reading. He was just sitting, being present. But he could feel it in the air, the distance between him and everyone else. When the lights came back on for a break, the crowd stood and moved around. Keanu got up and walked to the refreshment area. He poured himself a glass of water and stood by the window, watching the city outside. No one came to talk to him. A group of young models passed behind him. One of them whispered, "Why's he dressed like a bodyguard?" They all laughed. Keanu closed his eyes for a second. He wasn't angry. He was tired. Tired of being seen as just a role, a name, a meme. People didn't want the real him. They wanted the idea of him. The action star, the mysterious movie man. But the man standing there in worn-out clothes was just human. A young assistant with a tablet came up to him. "Mr. Reeves," she said nervously, "the next show is about to start. Would you like to return to your seat?" He nodded. "Sure. Thank you." As he walked back, he passed rows of people. Some ignored him. Some pointed at his boots. One woman even took a photo of him from behind and giggled. He heard the shudder. He didn't look back. The second part of the show began, and it was louder. Brighter, more wild. Feathers, leather, glowing masks. It looked like something out of a dream. Keanu watched it all, quiet as ever. He tried to stay focused, to enjoy the art, but his mind was drifting. He thought about simpler days, riding the subway, reading books at cafes, walking alone at night. He missed being invisible. Fame never suited him. It brought too many eyes, and too few hearts. A journalist sitting near him leaned over and asked, "Can I ask what designer you're wearing?" Keanu blinked. "Oh, I don't really know. I just wear what's comfortable." The journalist raised an eyebrow. "You're serious?" Keanu nodded. "Always." The journalist chuckled awkwardly and turned away, typing something quickly on her phone. By the end of the event, Keanu had become the silent joke of the night. People didn't say it to his face, but he felt it, in their stares, in their laughter, in their phones pointed at him when they thought he wasn't looking. As he stood up to leave, one of the organizers gave him a forced smile. "Thanks for coming, Mr. Reeves. It was unexpected." He smiled softly. "Thank you for having me." Outside, the night was cold. The lights of Paris shimmered in the distance. Keanu walked slowly, hands in his pockets. The laughter, the whispers, the camera flashes all faded behind him. They thought they had seen everything. They thought they knew who he was, but the truth was still waiting. And when it came, it would silence them all. Keanu Reeves returned to his hotel that night, his steps slow, his eyes thoughtful. The streets of Paris were still alive, full of lights, laughter, and late-night sounds. But inside his heart, there was a heavy silence. When he reached his room, he dropped his coat on the chair and sat on the edge of the bed. He didn't turn on the TV. He didn't check his phone. He just sat there, staring at the floor, deep in thought. He had been in the spotlight for years. He was used to fans, to questions, to cameras. But tonight felt different. The smiles were fake. The laughs were sharp. And the silence, it was loud. He could feel it pressing against him the whole night. For a few minutes, Keanu just sat in the quiet. Then, slowly, he got up and walked to the small table by the window. He opened his old leather notebook, the one he always carried with him. It was filled with his private thoughts, quotes, sketches, poems, and memories. He flipped through the pages until he found a blank one. He began to write, not about fashion or fame, but about pain. About the moments no one knew. The ones hidden behind every calm smile and every quiet word. He thought about his early days, how he slept on floors while trying to become an actor, how casting directors told him he was too stiff, too boring, not leading man material. He remembered losing his best friend, River Phoenix, to drugs. That loss never healed. River was like a brother, someone who understood his silence. And then, years later, he lost his daughter, born still. And just when he and the baby's mother began to heal, she died in a car crash. So much loss, so much grief. Yet no one at Fashion Week knew that. To them, he was just a quiet man in old clothes who didn't belong. He looked down at his boots, the same boots he wore when he buried his child, the same ones he wore when he visited River's grave. The ones that had walked through more sadness than any of those red carpet shoes ever would. People had laughed at them. They didn't know. He gently closed the notebook and leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. Across town, the laughter continued. Influencers posted videos mocking him. A popular fashion blogger uploaded a reaction video titled, "Keanu at Fashion Week. Why did no one stop him?" It went viral within hours. "He's dressed like he's going camping." One guest joked in an interview, "He must have thought it was a funeral." Someone else said. The internet followed, adding cruel comments and laughing emojis. It became a trend. People used his photo for memes and jokes. Hashtags like #Keanu Fashion Fail started trending. But not everyone was laughing. A few fans stood up for him. "Keanu doesn't need to prove anything," one wrote. "That man has more class in his pinky than all of them combined." Another said, "Y'all make fun of him now, but wait till you hear what he's been through." But those voices were small, quiet in a sea of noise. Meanwhile, Keanu remained silent. He didn't respond. He didn't post anything. He didn't defend himself. The next morning, he got up early and took a quiet walk by the Seine River. The city was calm at that hour, with only the sound of birds and the soft wind in the trees. He found a bench near the water and sat down. As the sun rose, he thought about all the times people had misunderstood him. All the roles he was offered only because they needed a sad man with empty eyes. They didn't know those eyes had seen real pain. They didn't know that behind the still face was a storm of memories. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an old photo of his daughter's ultrasound. He kept it folded carefully in his wallet. Just a small piece of a life that never got to bloom. He looked at it for a while, then put it back. Later that day, he would be speaking at a small charity dinner, something not part of Fashion Week, but held nearby. It was for grieving parents who had lost children. No cameras. No spotlights. Just broken hearts trying to heal together. As he stood up to leave the riverbank, Keanu felt something change inside him. He had let them laugh. He had let them whisper and mock. But soon, they would hear the truth. And when they did, they wouldn't be laughing anymore. He walked back to his hotel, quiet but calm, like a man walking through fire with no fear. Because when you've already lost everything once, you stop caring about the noise. You start speaking only when it matters. And when Keanu finally spoke, the world would stop to listen. The night of the charity dinner had arrived. It was held in a quiet hall far away from the bright lights of Fashion Week. There were no paparazzi here, no screaming fans or flashing cameras, just soft music, candlelight, and people who had known real pain. Keanu arrived early. He wore the same black coat, the same boots. Not because he wanted to prove a point, but because they were a part of him. He didn't care about the noise outside. He had come for something real. Inside the hall, people greeted him with gentle nods, soft smiles. They knew who he was, but they didn't treat him like a star. They treated him like one of them, someone who had loved and lost. Someone who understood. The guests at the event were parents, grandparents, brothers and sisters, each with a story of a child gone too soon. Some had framed photos on the table. Others held small keepsakes in their hands. There were tears in many eyes, but no one was trying to hide them. Keanu walked among the tables, not saying much. He listened. He hugged a mother who had lost her son to cancer. He held the hand of a father whose daughter had drowned at age 5. His presence wasn't loud, but it was strong. He made people feel seen. Later in the evening, the host stepped onto the small stage and said, "Tonight, we are honored to have someone who understands our pain. Someone who carries it with quiet strength. Please welcome Keanu Reeves." The room clapped softly as Keanu stood and made his way to the front. He didn't have a prepared speech, no teleprompter. Just his heart. He stood in front of the microphone for a moment, silent. Then he looked at the crowd and spoke in a calm, steady voice. "I don't usually talk about my personal life," he began. "But tonight, I think it's time." The room fell completely silent. He continued, "Years ago, I met someone who changed my life. Her name was Jennifer. We were going to be parents. We were so happy." He paused, looking down for a second, then looked back up, but our daughter was stillborn. We never got to hear her cry, never got to hold her while she smiled. Just silence. You could hear people crying softly now. Jennifer and I tried to carry that pain together. But not long after she died in a car accident. Suddenly, I was alone. Empty. He looked around the room. "I know many of you have walked that same dark road, and you know, it never really goes away. Grief becomes part of you. It lives in your bones." Some nodded. Others wiped tears from their cheeks. Keanu took a deep breath. "People see me as an actor, a movie star. But they don't see the nights I cried alone. They don't see the pain behind my smile. They just see the surface." Then, his voice softened. "That's why, when I walked into Fashion Week yesterday, I wasn't dressed to impress. I wore what makes me feel safe. The coat I wore to my daughter's funeral. The boots I wore when I sat at Jennifer's grave." He paused again. "I didn't come to show off. I came to support a cause. And yet, I was laughed at, mocked, judged for not looking fancy enough." Now the pain was clear in his eyes. "But here's what I want to say to those people," he said, a little firmer now. "Pain does not wear designer clothes. Loss doesn't shine under lights. Real strength, real beauty is not loud. It's quiet. It's in the way we keep going, even when it hurts. The room was silent. Every person was listening, hearts wide open. "I'm not telling this story for sympathy," he said. "I'm telling it because you all deserve to know. You're not alone." Grief is heavy, but when we share it, even just a little, it becomes lighter. A tear slid down Keanu's cheek, but he didn't wipe it away. "I carry my daughter with me, every day. I carry Jennifer. And maybe, through nights like this, we can carry each other." He stepped back. No big ending. No dramatic music. Just raw truth. The crowd stood in silence for a few seconds, then slowly began to clap. Not loud, not wild. Just soft, real applause. The kind that meant something. That night, no one saw a man in old boots. They saw a father. A broken heart. A soul that refused to give up. And far away, while the fashion world laughed at a photo of him online, Keanu Reeves was changing lives in a small, quiet room. Not with fame, not with fashion, but with truth. The next morning, Keanu Reeves woke up to a phone filled with messages. His manager had called 5 times. There were dozens of unread texts. Journalists, old friends, strangers, everyone suddenly wanted to talk to him. He didn't check them right away. Instead, he made himself a cup of tea, sat by the window of his hotel room, and watched the city move. Paris was waking up, cars rolling by, people hurrying to work, shopkeepers setting up their stands. The world kept spinning, no matter how heavy yesterday had felt. But this morning, something had changed. What Keanu didn't know was that someone at the charity dinner had recorded part of his speech. Just a few minutes. A quiet moment when he spoke about grief, about his daughter, about the boots he wore not for style, but for memory. That video had been shared on social media just a few hours ago. Now it was everywhere. People who had laughed at him the day before were suddenly silent. Influencers who posted memes about his outfit deleted them. One even posted an apology, writing, "We judged a man without knowing his story. I'm sorry, Keanu." News outlets picked it up fast. Articles with titles like, "Keanu Reeves silences Fashion Week with heartbreaking truth." Those weren't just boots, they were his history. The saddest man in Hollywood teaches. U.S. What Really Matters TV show started talking about it. Morning hosts cried while reading parts of his speech. Famous designers released statements. One wrote, "Fashion is meant to express." Keanu's truth was more powerful than any outfit. On our stage, meanwhile, Keanu finally checked his messages. He read them slowly. Some made him smile softly. Some made him pause. One message was from a young woman who wrote, "I lost my brother last year. I didn't think anyone understood, but your words helped me breathe again." Another said, "I used to think fashion was everything. Now I realize kindness is. Thank you." Keanu didn't reply to everyone, but he read each message with care. Later that day, he was invited to another event, a small gathering connected to Fashion Week. A dinner for designers, artists, and special guests. He didn't want to go at first, but then he thought maybe it was time to be seen again. This time, not in silence, but in peace. He wore the same coat, the same boots. No new suit. No stylist. Just him. When he walked into the dinner hall, the reaction was completely different. People turned. They stood. They clapped, not because he was famous, but because they now knew what he carried inside. Some came up to shake his hand. Others simply nodded, with respect in their eyes. The same designer who had laughed behind his back now came forward with red cheeks and said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Reeves, I was wrong." Keanu smiled gently. "It's okay. Most of us are, sometimes." Throughout the night, people didn't talk about trends or colors or runway shows. They talked about grief, healing, and why we judge people too quickly. One young model said, You reminded us we're all just human under the lights. At the end of the dinner, the host asked Keanu if he wanted to speak. He walked to the front, calm and quiet. He said only a few words. I didn't come to be a lesson. I came to support something important. But thank you for listening. That means more than you know. And then he sat back down. He didn't need to say more. He had already said everything that mattered. By the next morning, the headlines had shifted. Keanu was now being praised across the world, not for fashion, but for honesty. For showing that pain can be worn like armor, that grief is not weakness, and that kindness never goes out of style. The same boots that were mocked were now seen as powerful. The same coat that was laughed at was now respected. Fashion Week had been filled with lights, cameras, and expensive designs. But in the end, the most unforgettable moment came from a man who spoke softly, wore what he owned, and carried memories heavier than gold. And as Paris glowed under the evening sky, people everywhere began to ask themselves a quiet question. What story is that person carrying, the one I just judged? Because of Keanu, they paused. Because of Keanu, they looked deeper. And that was more powerful than any fashion show could ever be. The sun was setting over Paris, painting the sky in soft orange and pink. Keanu Reeves stood on the balcony of his hotel room, looking at the view but thinking about everything that had happened. Just a few days ago, people had laughed at him. They had judged him for what he wore, for being too quiet, too different. But now, the world had changed its tone. He wasn't smiling or proud. He didn't like attention. But he did feel something warm inside, peace. Not because people praised him now, but because his truth had finally been heard. His phone buzzed. Again. Another message, another email. More people reaching out. Some wanted interviews. Others wanted to book him for shows. Big designers now wanted him to wear their suits. Brands that ignored him 2 days ago were now calling him a symbol of pure humanity. But Keanu didn't care for that. He knew how fast fame could turn. One day you're a meme, the next day you're a hero. He didn't want to chase either. He just wanted to stay real. Still, one message caught his eye. It was from a quiet designer someone knew, not famous. Her message was short. Your story made me brave enough to share mine. I lost my sister last year. I've been designing clothes in her memory. If you ever want to meet, I'd be honored. Keanu read the message twice. He smiled, not because it was flattering, but because it was honest. He replied, I'd like that. Let's talk. That evening, Keanu attended one last event. It wasn't part of Fashion Week, but it was near a discussion about identity, loss, and how fashion should be more than just glamour. He was invited not as a guest, but as a speaker. He walked in wearing the same coat, the same boots. No one laughed this time. People clapped softly, not the kind of applause for a movie star. The kind meant for someone who had earned respect. Keanu took the stage and stood behind the microphone. His voice was calm, but strong. I never expected to become part of this week, he began. I've never thought of myself as fashionable. I just wear what feels like me. People nodded, listening closely. But after what happened a few days ago, he continued, I started thinking, maybe we've all forgotten something. Maybe in the chase for beauty we stopped seeing the soul. He looked around the room. I don't care what shoes someone wears. I care where those shoes have walked. I care what stories they hold. I care what pain they've survived. The room was silent. No one blinked. I wore these boots to a funeral, he said softly. I wore this coat when I said goodbye to the people I loved most. I didn't wear it to be noticed. I wore it because I carry them with me, still. Someone in the crowd wiped away a tear. We often look at others and decide their worth based on how they look. But we don't know their battles. We don't know what they've lost, or what they're fighting just to stand there. He paused, letting his words settle. I'm not here to make a statement. I'm here to ask a question. What if we listened more? What if we gave people a chance to show us who they really are, before we laugh, before we judge? A young man in the front row nodded, eyes shining. I'm just an actor, a quiet one. But I've learned something: kindness matters more than style, and truth will always outshine fashion. The room stood still, full of hearts cracked open. He stepped down from the stage. No music, no cheers. Just quiet respect. After the event, people came to him, not for selfies, but for conversations. They shared stories. They thanked him for showing a different side of what it meant to be seen. One woman said, "I haven't worn a dress in 5 years because I felt like I didn't belong in the fashion world. But now, I think I will." Another said, "You helped me remember that grief doesn't make us weak. It makes us human." Keanu listened to each of them, not like a celebrity, but like a friend. That's what made him special, not the movies, not the fame, but the way he made people feel safe in their own skin. Later that night, alone again in his room, Keanu looked out at the city one more time. He didn't need a stage anymore. He didn't need approval. He had shared his truth, and it had touched people, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. And sometimes, real is the most beautiful thing in the world. The next morning, the internet looked completely different. Where there had once been jokes and memes about Keanu Reeves, now there were kind words, thank you posts, and emotional videos. People from all over the world were sharing their own stories of grief, of pain, of feeling out of place. And each one said the same thing: if Keanu can carry his pain with dignity, so can I. News channels around the world talked about him. Not for a new movie, not for action scenes or box office numbers, but for something far more powerful: his honesty. Talk shows played clips of his speech. Fashion experts who had laughed earlier now praised him. One of them said, "Keanu reminded us why fashion must make space for feeling, not just beauty." People began reposting the video from the charity dinner, the part where he spoke about his daughter, about his coat and boots, and how they were connected to the people he lost. That moment touched millions. Even those who had never liked him before now saw him in a new light. At the same time, more celebrities started opening up. One famous actor posted, "I used to hide my pain. Watching Keanu speak made me realize I don't have to." Another wrote, "He came in silent, but he left the loudest message we've heard in years." Keanu, meanwhile, stayed away from the noise. He didn't make any public statements. He didn't celebrate. He stayed in his hotel, reading, walking the city streets, drinking coffee in small cafes. If someone recognized him, he smiled politely, nodded, and moved on. He didn't need applause. He had found peace in just being real. But then, something surprising happened. The head of one of the biggest fashion houses in Paris reached out to him. She wanted to meet, not for business, not to dress him, but to thank him. She met him in a quiet gallery where art hung on the walls like soft memories. She wore no makeup, no bright dress, just a simple black outfit and tired eyes. "I lost my son 5 years ago," she said softly, holding a small necklace. "I never told anyone. I thought I had to be strong, cold, perfect in this industry." Keanu listened quietly. "But when I saw your video," she continued, "I cried in front of my whole staff. And for the first time, I didn't care." He looked at her gently and said, "Grief has no rules. It just asks to be felt." She nodded, eyes wet, and said, "Thank you. You changed more than you know." After that meeting, something shifted. In the fashion world, designers began talking more about emotion, about clothing that tells stories, not just follows trends. One designer started a new line called Memory, inspired by Keanu's coat and boots. Each piece came with a tag for the buyer to write their own story, a memory, a loss, A hope. It became the most talked about fashion movement of the year. Back in Los Angeles, a young woman opened a gallery titled The Man in the Boots. It showed black and white photographs of people who had experienced great loss, wearing the clothes they wore during those moments. At the center of the gallery was a picture of Keanu, sitting quietly in his seat at Fashion Week, the night he was mocked. People waited in line for hours to see it. Keanu heard about it but didn't go. He felt humbled, even a little shy. He didn't want to become a symbol. He just wanted people to know they weren't alone. One night, as he walked along the Seine River again, he passed a couple sitting on a bench. The woman was crying softly. The man held her hand, whispering gentle words. Keanu didn't stop them. He just nodded in their direction and kept walking. But the man looked up and recognized him. He called out, "Keanu." Keanu turned. The man smiled and said, "She lost her mom. Your words helped." Keanu gave a soft smile and replied, "I'm glad they reached her." And then he kept walking, into the cool night, with the same steady steps that had carried him through years of quiet suffering. Still wearing the same boots. Still carrying the same memories. But now something was different. He wasn't walking alone anymore. The world, once blind to his pain, was now walking beside him. Not out of pity, but out of understanding. The morning air in Paris was fresh and quiet. Birds sang softly, and the streets were calm. Keanu Reeves stepped outside his hotel one last time, his old boots touching the cobbled street like they had many times before. His coat moved gently in the wind. He wasn't rushing. He never did. He had one more place to go before leaving the city. It wasn't a fancy building or a fashion event. It was a small children's hospital on the edge of town. No one had invited him. He had read about it in a newspaper the day before, about how some of the children there were fighting for their lives. He asked his driver to take him there without calling ahead. He didn't want attention. He just wanted to sit with those who were hurting. When he arrived, the nurses were surprised. "Keanu Reeves?" one asked, blinking. "Is it really you?" He smiled softly and said, "I was nearby. Thought I could say hello." They quickly led him to the children's floor. Most of the kids didn't know who he was, but they didn't need to. He wasn't there as a movie star. He was there as a kind man who knew how to sit in silence, without making it awkward. He sat with a little boy named Leo who was too tired to talk. Keanu just held his hand and told him a quiet story about a brave astronaut who flew into space all alone, but found light in the stars. The boy smiled, even if just a little. He gave one girl a small sketchbook. "Draw your dreams," he said. "Even if they're strange, especially if they're strange." Another child asked, "Are you sad?" Keanu looked into the boy's eyes and nodded. "Sometimes, but I also feel lucky to be alive. Even when it hurts." He stayed for a few hours, visiting room by room. Not many photos were taken. There were no reporters. But the children smiled, and the nurses whispered, "He's the real thing." Later that afternoon, Keanu returned to his hotel to pack. His flight was in the evening. Paris had changed him, even if he hadn't come for change. Across the world, people were still talking about him. His speech, his silence, his kindness. But Keanu didn't read the articles. He didn't check the videos. He had never done any of this to be seen. Before leaving his hotel room, he sat on the bed and pulled out his leather notebook. The same one where he wrote after Fashion Week. The same one that held years of quiet thoughts. He opened it to a new page and wrote, "Sometimes the smallest voice carries the biggest truth." He closed the notebook and placed it in his bag. At the airport, a woman working at the gate recognized him. She walked over shyly and whispered, "Thank you for what you said. It helped me with something I've been carrying." Keanu nodded. "We all carry something. I just decided to stop hiding it." She smiled and wished him a safe flight. As the plane took off and the city grew smaller below him, Keanu leaned his head back and looked out the window. He thought about the journey, not just to Paris, but through his life. The laughter, the judgment, the loneliness, and also the warmth, the kindness, the moments when someone said, "Me too." He didn't feel angry about what had happened at Fashion Week. He didn't hold any hate for those who mocked him. Because in the end, they gave him a chance to speak. And that truth, once released, had echoed far beyond the runway. Somewhere out there, people were hugging their loved ones a little tighter. Some were calling someone they hadn't spoken to in years. Some were simply looking at strangers with softer eyes, wondering what silent battles they might be facing. All because one man wore his grief instead of hiding it. All because he chose not to shout but to speak from the heart. Keanu closed his eyes on the flight, not to sleep, but to remember. He thought of River. He thought of Jennifer. He thought of the baby girl he never got to hold. He whispered quietly, as if they could hear him, "I carried you with me. I always will." And somewhere in that silence, there was peace. Keanu Reeves arrived home a little older, a little quieter, but with a soul that had touched millions. He had gone to Fashion Week a stranger in the room. He left it as something much greater, a reminder that pain does not make us weaker. That truth has power, that silence can speak, and that sometimes the most broken hearts shine the brightest light. The man in the boots never changed. The world just finally saw who he really was.